Hello, I'm Jay, owner of Volunteer Audio in Oliver Springs, Tennessee. 5 months ago, this radio was released, the Soundstream Reserve HDHU14+. We were the first to bring you a video telling you about it, when you should use it, and all the new upgrades this was going to bring to your bike. Now fast forward, thousands of radios sold later, they're all over the country, and we've learned a lot about this radio. I want to take a few minutes and go over these things. Maybe it'll help save you some trouble with your install. Maybe it'll help answer some questions and let you decide, is this right or wrong for your bike? All right, so just as we expected, we did a lot of research in this before we ever brought it to you. Volunteer Audio vets all of the products very well before we ever sell them to one of our customers. And if we have problems with something, we quit selling it. I'm very, very happy to say that has not been the case with this radio. It has exceeded our expectations in many, many ways. And since its release, there have been 2 separate software updates that added new features that made it an even better radio. But let's go over some things that this radio will not do, because I want to make sure we're very clear for the few people out there that haven't watched our other videos. So this radio is a direct bolt-in radio for 2014 and newer Harleys. I want to be completely clear, it will not fit a 1998-13 Harley with a Metra interfering swap, street glide or road glide. This won't work. It bolts completely differently. The face is far larger than a doubled-in radio, and it won't work. Hopefully in the future, I've got a solution for you, so please be patient and don't butcher things up trying to make it fit. It also uses thumb controls that are CAN operated, where your old 98-13 bikes use analog inputs for that. So let's go on to some more things. Wired headsets will not work with this radio. Wireless headsets also won't work, but I don't want to just tell you they don't work. I want to try to explain to you why they don't work. So Harley kind of had a workaround with Apple Carplay and Android Auto. First off, when you get Apple certified or Android certified, and this isn't a knockoff radio with some sort of bootleg software doing Apple CarPlay and Android. They went before both manufacturers, and they had to meet all their specs, from the speed of the processor to the quality of the screen, the size of the screen, but also one very important thing. So if you have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto and it is active in your radio, it has to disable the Bluetooth inside the radio. So what this means, when you're using one of the 2 big features, Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, the Bluetooth is turned off and your headsets would not have connected. So no need to go further and build software and other parts inside the radio to connect to your headset, because anytime you're using Google Maps, Waze, Apple Maps, all your music apps that you wanted on screen, your headset wasn't going to function. Now there's a little bit of a workaround. Harley installed a separate part called a wireless headset interface module, also known as a WIM. So the WIM allowed them to have Bluetooth to the headset that wasn't inside the radio. So that was their workaround. I've talked to the guys at Soundstream. I don't think we're ever going to have that. And I'll go into more detail as to probably why. So if you have a set of headsets that you use to communicate with other riders, whether they're in your motorcycle club, or maybe they're just in a small group that rides, or maybe it's just you and your spouse, those communication devices still work through Bluetooth or mesh network from rider to rider with no radio needed. You can also take your phone that has Bluetooth. Now I told you Bluetooth is going to cut off on the radio. It does not cut off on your phone. So if you'll take your phone and connect it to your headset for phone calls only, and then connect media to your radio, when someone calls you, as long as you answer from the headset, you're still going to have your phone calls in your headset. So you still have 2-way communication with your passenger. You still can answer your phone calls. And come on, let's get real. You bought one of the best radios to have the best audio on your bike. You want to hear the audio coming out the front speakers anyways. So when you're listening to your music apps or whatever it is that you're listening to, including your navigation apps, it's only going to come through the speakers. There is no way, I've looked at it every direction, there's no way to send your navigation directions or your sound into your headset. But I hope the time we took here helps you understand what you can still do with your existing headsets. All right, so let's talk about the GTS radio. Features that may make you want to keep it over this radio, and future things that may be coming out. So if you have a GTS radio, it's going to do those wireless headset as long as you have a WIM installed. It's also going to retain your CB. If you're one of the few that still use a CB, this radio will not retain a CB. Now let's talk about some GTS limitations though. So your GTS radio, you're either going to have to add a DSP to have a decent EQ, or you're going to have to flash that radio to fix the awful factory EQ curve. One of the issues with this is you could go back to your Harley dealer for service and they could unflash your radio, and then you're going to have to go through that process again. With this radio, you do not have to flash anything. So when you buy the Soundstream HDHU14, it's going to drop right in a 14 or newer bike, and you do not have to go to the dealer to have anything flashed. It is going to be completely plug and play, with the exception if you have boom, stage 1 or stage 2 amplifiers, they are CAN data turn on. What that means is the signal from the computer turned those amps on from the radio. That was part of the boom 2 flash inside the radio. This radio is not flashable. It is not going to retain those amps with the current model. The future model that does iDataLink Maestro capability will turn those factory amplifiers on. This includes the HD audio by Rockford that was for 21 and newer. That amplifier will not be retained with this radio. But let's be clear, aftermarket Rockford Fosgate amplifiers, Arc audio amplifiers, Hertz amplifiers, Sound Digital amplifiers, whatever brand, Diamond Audio, all these other amplifiers that are aftermarket are going to be retained simply by changing the radio. So let's talk about those aftermarket amps a little further. So some people had a question about this connector. This is our amp turn-on wire. It's on our plug-and-play harness, and it has a factory accessory connector just like what's in the fairing of your Harley. If you bought a Rockford Fosgate stage package from Rockford, you're going to recognize this as the place where your amp turn-on wire plugs into. It would have plugged into like a factory cigarette lighter plug or ignition plug. A lot of your lights that you've added on plug into these same connectors. So this is not only plug and play in the sense that it has the main Harley harness, it's plug and play that your accessories like your power antenna, that hidden antenna in your fairing, those lights you've added on, or your amp that was built specifically to plug into a Harley from Rockford, from Arc Audio, from Sounds, from Volunteer Audio on our Hertz amplifiers, they're all going to plug into this without having to cut anything off. All right. It also is going to use your factory USB. If you bought a Sony radio and you already had it in your bike and you took the factory USB out, you're going to need another one. Hopefully you still have it. If you don't still have it, they're available at volunteeraudio.com. Street Glide and Road Glide have 2 different length USBs, so make sure you buy the correct one if you don't have one already. All right, so one other big thing we learned. This radio uses differential RCA outputs. That is a really good thing. It means we're not going to have ground loop problems when we hook it to the proper amplifier. The big problem is a lot of guys out there who follow YouTube and listen to all the people in the forums have been buying Sound Digital amplifiers. They do this because they're told that they're so much more powerful, and we'll have some future videos that maybe go into hopefully shedding some light on some of those terms and the way they're tested and give you some more information about the amp. I'm not a huge fan of them, but plenty of people are running them and they work. So I'm going to tell you how to use your amp, especially if you've already bought it, with this radio. So if you've got a Sound Digital amp, you plug into the RCAs on the back of this radio, you are going to get a tremendous amount of noise. And here's the technical reason why. This uses differential outputs. That means that the outer sheathing on your RCA connection, that outer chrome part, that metal part, is the negative part of your RCA. All of those RCAs on the back of this radio have separate negative points. They're not tied together. Old amplifiers and radios from the 80s and old marine amps used to be common ground, meaning that all those outer sheaths were tied together and hooked to ground in the radio. Well, your Sound Digital amp has common ground RCA inputs. When you hook differential outputs to common ground inputs, you get a ground loop. You're basically shorting all of these wires together that are not supposed to be connected. This gives us a bunch of noise that you're thinking is probably a problem from the radio. I didn't have it before I changed my radio, now I have this noise. That's not the case. The radio doesn't create the noise. The short that is now happening between that ground on your RCA is making that awful noise. There is a fix. So even though it has common ground inputs on the Sound Digital amp, it has differential inputs if you go high level in, that speaker level in. So let's be clear on this. Low level is RCA. RCA takes the signal in the radio, it cuts it to a very low voltage, it's fed into the amplifier boosts that back up. That low level RCA though has a tendency to pick up noise from LED headlights, from oxygen sensor adapters that go from wideband to narrowband. Different things in your bike can create noise that's picked up. The stator charging system isn't the cleanest charging system. Noises from that can be picked up in RCA, and now we're putting on these super bright, super tweeters, and you're hearing all this whine. You don't have to have that noise. In every Harley install, every amp that we do at Volunteer Audio, and most major brands, and I could list a whole bunch of them, use what's called high-level input. And here's what that means. That means the speaker wires that come from the radio run to the input of the amplifier. So we're feeding this stronger, higher signal, it's normally about 10 volts or so, maybe a little more, into the input side of the amplifier. Most modern amplifiers have high level in. Most of them handle 10 volts of input current without a problem. So on your Sound Digital amp, cut this harness right here, right where the speaker wires are. This was included in the radio, you didn't pay any extra for it, but if you cut it here, you now have input for the high level of your amp. Connect the output of your amp to the remaining wires and feed them out to the speakers. By doing this, we now have differential in to the amplifier accepts it, and we lose all that crazy static and noise. You're also sending a much stronger signal into the amp that wasn't as susceptible to picking up the LED emitting noise or the noise from your electrical charging system. So at the end of it all, you have a cleaner, stronger signal. Your amplifier is doing its job. All it does is amplify. Feed it a greater signal on the input, you get a greater signal on the output. Now you will have to adjust your gains way less because you're sending such a great signal into it. Now this isn't just for Sound Digital, this would be for any common ground amp, but the big name that we're seeing over and over is Sound Digital. If you go to your Diamond amps, Serwin Vega amps, Hertz amps, Rockford amps, Arc Audio, all these other brands, they use differential RCA ends. Plug them up to the RCA, it is fine. Now let's talk about the next thing. You're gonna have a lot of people out there tell you, you gotta have a DSP, you gotta have a DSP, you gotta have a DSP. They told you this because in the beginning, we didn't have a way to flash radios. And the only way to correct the awful EQ curve that was in that original radio was to put a digital signal processor in place and correct it on the input side of your amplifier. This created a much better result on the output side. Since then, many people have realized that if we buy these speakers with these super loud tweeters, that a lot of times that isn't to our liking. I would suggest don't buy a bunch of horn tweeters and it won't be too loud for you. But if you did, a DSP allows you to turn those tweeters down and makes it where it's more enjoyable to listen to. At Volunteer Audio, you'll find very few horn tweeters available from us because we want a very enjoyable listening experience without having to turn down most of what we paid for. All right, so there is not going to be a DSP needed for this radio, but if you bought a lower quality DSP, and there are many brands out there that meet this lower price point, a lot of those are using common ground inputs. So you had one on your original radio, you now take it, you plug it in your new radio, and you get this awful noise and you think there's something wrong with the radio. There's nothing wrong with the radio. You hooked up a common ground input, again, just like on the Sound Digital amp, into those differential outputs of the radio. So I wanted to cover those things to hopefully answer the question of why you're having noises, why you're having problems. At Volunteer Audio, we have sold a tremendous number of these radios. So many, I probably don't even know an accurate number of how many. I can tell you that in electronics, we normally shoot to see less than 3% failure rate in a product. This has been way under the 1% level. It has been a phenomenal radio. They work right out of the box just like they're supposed to. There have been some software updates that have added new features, and as long as you hook this up properly, you're going to get a much greater result than you got from your original radio. Customer after customer continues to call me Rockford kits, Arc Audio amps, Diamond amps, our Hertz amps. They tell me it sounds so much better after changing the radio. It's exactly what you said it would be. Let's go over the next thing, thumb controls. All right, so the correct way your thumb controls will work after you replace it with this radio is you're gonna get volume up and down from both sides. So your right control is volume up and down, and if you press in on the right control, it's going to mute the radio. So if you pull up at a red light, you're wanting to holler at somebody, it's going to very quickly bring that volume down. On your left control, up and down is volume up and down. Left and right is track forward, track backwards, seek backwards, depending on the source you're in. If you press in on the left control, it's going to change the source. So it's only going to go through available sources. If you don't have a USB plugged in, it's not going to go to USB. It is going to go to FM, it's going to go to Carplay or Android Auto. If your phone is connected to those, if you have a Bluetooth device connected, it's going to go to Bluetooth. So it's going to cycle through those available sources, the ones that you're actually using. All right, right control is no longer going to do something that some people call cursor control. So this wasn't an issue on a GT radio. Your radio didn't do it. You did have an info button that on some models would show you things like oil pressure, oil temperature, or if your EITMS was activated. Now, I will tell you, all of those things still work in your bike. They're not displayed on the radio. If your oil pressure gets low, the little oil can is going to come on in your speedometer cluster. If your temperature gets too hot, the temperature light is going to come on. EITMS is still active and still will automatically cut on if you get in a situation where you're at idle and your bike's running hot. Now you can turn EITMS on and off without a radio installed exactly like you would on a Road King. Do a simple Google search for how to activate it without a radio and you'll see plenty of results. If you can't find it, reach out to us at Volunteer Audio. I'll be happy to forward that on to you. So cursor control is this. On a new GTS radio, when you're in Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, you can use the right controls to move through the sources or different items inside Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You cannot do that with a replacement radio. This was built to do all 14 and newer bikes, not just 19 and newer with the latest GTS models. So cursor control is currently not an option. Hopefully it will be an option with iDataLink. I'm not sure yet. I haven't got to play with it. We haven't got to try it yet. But you were most likely had your phone mounted to your handlebar before. If you wanted to change something inside of your phone, you were reaching up and you were selecting another source. If you're in Apple CarPlay or Android Auto and you're in a playlist or you're in Pandora, you're in whatever you want to do, your controls are going to work great. You're going to do volume up and down, you're going to change to the next song. Everything you need is at your fingertips. If you want to change from Spotify to Slacker or Slacker to Pandora, or maybe you want to zoom in on the map, those functions are going to happen from the screen. So backing up, no headset capability, no CB capability, will not retain boom amplifiers. No cursor control from your thumb controls. Radio-wise, best radio you can put in your Harley. If you're buying something for better sound, faster boot times, this is your radio. Better EQ control. It sounds better than every factory option available. Still IPX waterproof, just like the stock radio. Optically bonded screen, just like the stock radio. There is no downside other than the things that I just mentioned to you. In a future model, at a higher price point, we'll tackle some of those issues. I don't think you'll ever get CB or wireless headset communication from a Soundstream radio. It's not going to happen, so don't think that a future model is going to do that. I did not say that. But I'm here to tell you, 5 months later, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of radios sold through us, thousands of radios sold nationally, and this radio is holding up like a champ. Plenty of people have washed their bike, been in the rain. The water is not an issue. You can see it clearly, it sounds great, and it is holding up exactly like we thought it would. We're proud to be authorized dealers for Soundstream Reserve and the Precision Power brand, and I'm really excited to show you future builds with all the Precision Power products they've come out with that are on the same quality level as your new radio. So thank you for watching. I hope this cleared up some information. I hope it answered a lot of questions. Please, please subscribe to the channel. Like this video, and if you have more questions you think we didn't answer or we didn't go over, comment below. I'll make sure that we mention them in future videos. Call me, 1-844-30-AUDIO, gets you straight to us, straight to our warehouse. Sales at Vol Audio if you want to email us, or comment below, and I'll be very quick to answer your questions. Thank you for watching, and God bless.